They're stuck in that plastic chair in school. How awful.
It's like a judgment on what is in your head.
On your thoughts.
There's this big challenge in writing motivation. Nicola, do you ever struggle for writing motivation?
Oh, absolutely, Sam. Daily, if I'm being completely honest with you. I get writer's block all the time. That's what it's called, isn't it? We call it writer's block. It's an acknowledged thing, isn't it? I think anybody who writes, whether that's kind of resource creation or planning or even something, that you're writing passionately about, knows that staring at a blank page, or that kind of blinking cursor, if you know what I mean, whatever it might be, can be incredibly daunting and incredibly frustrating. So what's fascinating to me is that as adults we have a kind of coping mechanisms, don't we? We have like a toolkit of coping mechanisms for those things, almost. We can go and grab a coffee, or walk away for 5 minutes, or remind ourselves why we have to do that thing, or kind of completely kind of shelve it and rethink about it in a different way, I guess. But pupils that we teach, they don't have that luxury, do they? When they hit that kind of wall of low motivation, they're really stuck, aren't they? They're stuck in that plastic chair in school. How awful.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah.
Often with all of those, it's like being in an exam, isn't it, as well? Often with all of those other people around them feeling that pressure. And I suppose we have to kind of consider the different personalities within that as well, and the different kind of learning nuances, if you like. So, I suppose if we struggle as adults, and as I say, I don't know about you, but I completely struggle with writing sometimes. It's completely natural that pupils do too, but I think tenfold is going to be loads worse for them, isn't it?
Yeah. I was reminded that you and I both started Substacks fairly recently, didn't we? And when I started that, I thought, right, article every month. I'm gonna trot these out at least once a month. When was the last time I wrote an article on the Substack? It was about 6 months ago. As the listener might have guessed, writing motivation is exactly what we're going to be talking about in this episode. My name is Sam Denno and this is Nicola Romaine. We're both English leads at Twinkle, representing different phases of the education journey, and we're looking at various aspects of the government's Writing Framework for Schools, which was released in 2025. Now, the Writing Framework posits motivation as being an enormously significant factor in a learner's writing journey. It suggests that the development of self-confidence and self-belief through personal success and via teacher praise is critical, and so it's important to be strategic around things like the timing of activities, around feedback, around the appropriate level of challenge for students. And the writing framework describes motivation for writing as, and this is in quotation marks, encouraging pupils to believe they can be successful and make progress, ensuring they have a chance of success, and helping them to manage negative emotions, which almost sounds like being a cheerleader or a personal trainer. And in many ways, of course, it's appropriate that a teacher casts themselves in that role. Do you think, Nicola, that cheerleader, motivator responsibility becomes more pronounced when it comes to writing versus other disciplines, other topics within English?
I really do, actually, and I think it comes down to exposure. Writing is incredibly vulnerable. We think about maths. If a child gets a maths calculation wrong, it's often a single digit or a misplaced decimal, that kind of thing. It feels mechanical. But writing is an externalization of your own thoughts, isn't it? It's your voice, your thoughts, your imagination.
Yes, so even to have somebody say, no, you've done that wrong, it's almost like a judgment on
your thoughts,
what is in your head,
in the way that you articulate your thought
Yeah.
process. So when a child puts words on a page, they're putting a piece of themselves, as you say, out there to be judged, aren't they? So because of that vulnerability in itself, the negative emotions, the fear of failure, the anxiety about spelling, the frustration, I suppose, can spike much higher in writing than in other subjects. So yes, as teachers, we do have to be personal trainers. I think we have to coach pupils through the heavy lifting of composition as well, celebrate the tiny wins, really celebrate that voice. It's really important to celebrate that individual voice and their and kind of their opinions, isn't it? To really build the pupil's stamina and their self-esteem and their resilience, actually, as writers. You can't just teach writing, can you, Sam? You have to really foster that emotional resilience required to be able to do it.
When we talk about motivation, I feel like we're coming back round to the conversation around writing identity. And if a pupil thinks of writing as an extension of themselves and their skills, then they'll keep on doing it. And that's what the framework proposes. It says that the most powerful driver of self-confidence is successful performance. So I suppose my question there then is it possible to help a learner who has low self-confidence and, let's say, low ability to identify as a writer? Or is it only strong writers who identify as writers?
It is possible, but it requires us to completely reframe what being a writer means in the classroom, I think. If a child thinks a writer is only someone who produces a flawless, 3-page story, they'll obviously look at their own 2 sentences and decide, well, I'm not a writer, won't they? It's natural to feel that way. So to change that identity, we have to lean, into that quote from the framework. So successful performance, we have to engineer guaranteed, bite-sized victories for them. So sort of champion those small wins, if you like. So if a pupil has low writing stamina, their success that day shouldn't be measured by volume. Definitely not, should it? We've moved on from that, definitely, hopefully, haven't we? It might be, look at this one sentence you wrote, or, the vocabulary choice here is brilliant. You're a writer because you've just moved a reader with that said the way that you've written that sentence. So we also need to untangle transcription from composition, which is something we've spoken about in previous episodes. So if a child is a brilliant storyteller, for example, but really struggles with that handwriting or spelling, so those transcription skills, I think things like letting them voice record their ideas so that we validate their ideas at the same time as getting the transcription automatic as well, or scribing for them occasionally is going to build up that sort of self-esteem, that resilience for them, and showing them that their ideas have great value as well. And then suddenly they start seeing themselves as authors, even though the mechanical side of things are still catching up.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's encouraging then. Yeah. And yes, well, we've not mentioned voice recording before. That's a new one on the show, but we have mentioned
Scribing.
mini whiteboards as well, haven't we? And that sort of temporary kind of being able to compose on a sort of temporary surface.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is also of value there. Writing stimuli can come from different places. I love the suggestion in the framework that it might be based on topics that learners have covered in other areas of the curriculum, and obviously we can see that in primary schools, but also you can imagine that being a stimulus in a secondary school where there's good sort of cross-curricular joined upness. Choice is important, either on a macro level, choosing which words or grammar to use in a simple sentence, or in a more sort of significant theme-based level, so giving a pupil the choice of what they're writing about, how they use punctuation, how they structure their sentences. Some of Teresa Kremen's research demonstrates that goal-based writing is effective for motivation. Pupils often enjoy a writing to persuade task, for example, because that allows them to use their written voice in a meaningful way. And obviously this carries forwards into GCSE and the writing tasks on the English language exam, that writing to persuade idea coming back around there again quite regularly. There's this big intrinsic challenge in writing motivation. We've gone on record to say in this series that pupils need to get the transcription basics right before we overload them with composition expectations. So finessing the perfect sentence, you've mentioned sentences already, before composing a story. However, as we've said, the writing framework also says pupils are motivated by interesting, meaningful stimuli. So writing one perfect sentence might not feel terribly exciting. How do we get that balance here between like breaks on teaching for establishing the basics, holding them back, and then breaks off attitudes for building that motivation, building the stimuli?
That's the ultimate tightrope walk in primary and secondary English, isn't it? You know, that friction between I want to write a story about this, but I need to remember my capital letters and full stop. So I think possibly the key is, you know, avoiding the trap of making the basics feel like a barrier to entry or some kind of, you know, punishment, if you like. So we can frame, I think it's important as educators that we move on now and frame the basics as the tool for the excitement, if you like. You know, for example, if you want to write an exciting space battle or whatever it might be, you know, you need the reader to feel the tension. So how do we do that? And we have to do that by writing or practicing writing short, dramatic, single clause sentences, because that's what that kind of writing requires, if you like. So suddenly practicing a simple sentence isn't boring because it has a purpose and it's a particular type of so we've established what we want to be able to write. We've discussed that type of writing, the purpose for that writing, and now we're backtracking and thinking about, okay, what kind of sentences do I need to be able to write in order to compose a really great, you know, story or you know, write about an exciting space battle, whatever it might be. So I suppose it's a tactical device then to make their story more thrilling. So we can split our lessons or our sessions. You know, you can have a breaks on focused mini lesson where we engineer the perfect sentence together using a stimulus of whatever it might be, and then give them a kind of breaks off period or session where they can apply it freely. I guess that's okay to do that as well. And the basics then obviously provide the safety sort of net or the safety tracks for so that when, you know, when they do let the brakes off, you know, pardon the kind of puns here, but you know, the train doesn't derail completely. So I think it is a balance, and we have to consider motivation like we've considered cognitive load and working memory. We need to consider motivation as well, and balance how important that is versus the writing itself, I guess.
Yeah, and I suppose going back to that idea of cheerleader, in a sense, like as teachers, we have to be able to enthuse, like you say, a single sentence, the way we arrange it, that can be exciting. So we need to be able to get behind it and get excited about it. I think often teachers themselves are more excited about the
end product.
Yeah.
You can play around with a sentence, can't you, in a really kind of like controlled environment and really build on that.
And they're infinite as well, aren't they? Yeah. You can, like, again, going back to our own writing, if you're doing a piece of work, you can put a sentence in and think, nah, I don't like the order of that. And then you go back, switch it round, try it out, do all sorts of things with it. So yes, I think you're right. I think sentences are exciting. Is the widening of the attainment gap between those competent writers who can take off and get on with the composition and those writers who are stuck behind, I've got to get the sentence right, writers, is that attainment gap is going to widen and widen, isn't it? Is that an inevitability?
It can feel like that, can't it? Because of the Matthew effect in education, you know, the idea of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. You know, competent writers enjoy writing because they're good at it, aren't they? You know, it's a natural kind of thing. So they write more and they get better at it. Practice is part of that as well, isn't it? You know, if you find it easy to practice something, then that's going to create growth around that thing. Low confidence writers find it hard, so they avoid it, and the gap widens. So around and around we go. So yeah, that's the Matthew effect, isn't it? But I sort of refuse to believe it's inevitable, really. You know, we break that cycle by changing the entry point for lower ability writers, don't we? That's the way forward. So if we give the exact same unscaffolded writing prompt to the whole class, yes, that gap will widen. It's inevitable. But if we heavily scaffold the transcription elements for those who really, really need it, who are really, really struggling, you know, providing word banks or sentence frames or structured oral rehearsal, all of those things that we do, then we free up their cognitive load so that they can actually participate in that joy of composing. So the gap only widens, Sam, if we keep expecting every child to climb the same mountain without providing kind of the right climbing gear.
Sometimes teachers just need pupils to write boring stuff in the end. There are things that we have to get the kids to write that are boring. How do we avoid dry content from casting a shadow over that writing process?
No one wakes up thrilled to write a formal report on, you know, something like the water cycle, do they? So I think the secret there is changing the audience or the purpose rather than the content itself. If they're writing an explanation text, for example, you know, don't just say, write a report about rocks. Instead, you know, something like, oh, you're a museum curator and an eccentric billionaire wants to buy this rock. Write an expert report convincing him why it's worth £1 million.
Okay.
Is that motivating?
Yeah, that's better.
Suddenly, the content is exactly the same. You're hoping for the same outcome, aren't you? But the context gives it a more kind of motivating and playful angle. You know, so a little bit of imaginative framing, I think, can turn a really sort of dry piece of writing into, you know, something more motivating.
I suppose what you might end up with then is a piece of very flowery creative writing when you just want a report.
Be controlled, but I think adding some element of motivation into that to make it more compelling is a good idea.
Yeah. Well, we've been over some tricks of the trade, such as that one already. Are there any additional motivation strategies that you would propose, Nicola?
So one strategy I love is shared writing. So how about this one? Shared writing with a twist. Oh. So instead of the teacher modelling the perfect text, you know, the teacher purposely models a terrible piece of writing full of cliches and missing punctuation, boring verbs, you name it. And pupils absolutely love, don't they, fixing or spotting a teacher's mistakes. So it instantly, so when we're thinking about motivation, I am going in a direction here. So when we think about motivation, it completely flips that power dynamic, doesn't it? And gives them a kind of boost of confidence. So I think that's a good method. And another one would be the writing gallery, maybe. So instead of marking books in isolation, or looking at people's work in isolation, pupils leave books open on their tables, and have a little walk around, do a silent kind of walk where they sort of leave sort of sticky notes with praise, that kind of thing, for each other's work. So that brings about a really kind of like collaborative, motivating environment for writing, I think. And that peer validation, isn't it, is an incredibly potent motivator, I think, in itself. I think we would, as adults and pupils, agree with that. Sometimes far more powerful than teacher praise. Yeah,
they're brilliant. I love reading a student's work back to them in a sort of readerly manner, in a sort of almost theatrical manner, and sort of just to do justice to the effort that they've gone to. And sometimes you can pick up a student's bit of work and it doesn't read terribly well, but you can read it off the page in a much more kind of deliberate, in a mannered way that excites them, that makes them think, look, there's value in my writing and somebody is reading that out loud and it sounds all right. Which I suppose in some ways offers a false economy, because I'm doing the heavy lifting via a performance, but it enables the pupil to grasp the idea that writing is written to be read, and they can see that, they can hear that out loud with their work.
I think we both recall times in the classroom as teachers that we've done that, read a piece of writing out loud, and that child who's written it just kind of glows because that is how they intended for it to be heard, if you like. But they've struggled so much, I guess, to be able to get it down on the paper, on the page. It's liberating to be able to hear it in that way, because that's how they heard it in their own heads. I don't think it's a false economy at all, to be honest. You're not doing the heavy lifting, are you, of the writing itself. You're doing the heavy lifting of the delivery. So when you read a child's work back to them, with that kind of theatrical flair, that you're talking about, you're showing them the ultimate respect to an author, I would say. And that's what they are. That piece of work is very personal to them, isn't it? You're showing them what their words sound like when you breathe life into them. You add that prosody and expression to their words. And as we said, that's what they heard in their heads and they've got it onto paper. So for them, that's very motivating in itself to hear somebody be able to articulate their words in the correct manner. And I suppose when a child struggles with reading fluency, hearing their own ideas delivered with rhythm and drama is magical. It bridges the gap between the painful mechanics of physical writing and that kind of beautiful reality of storytelling, I guess. So it shows them the finish line, doesn't it? And honestly, that's exactly what keeps them coming back to the next page, I would say. That's what motivates.
Well, I think let's wrap it up there. I think that's been absolutely splendid. You can reach us. We'd love to hear your strategies as well, listener. You can reach us on twinklepod at twinkle.co.uk. We likes, subscribes, 5-star reviews. Keep them coming. Thank you so much, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's been great.
Thanks for listening. Goodbye for now.